Good morning on this Sunday, December 27th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. More big names head to Georgia for the U.S. Senate races that will decide the balance of power in Washington. Georgia gets the coronavirus vaccine, but there are a lot of questions on which healthcare facilities are getting it first. And an Atlanta city councilman says the city needs leadership after a 7-year-old girl is shot in the head in Buckhead. Farron, Phil, Kathy are all here, and Brian Robinson is filling in for Janelle. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
A little more than a week to go until the Senate runoffs. Georgia continues to be the epicenter of politics.
And just like you did, you will do it again.
The vice president-elect thanked Georgia for voting in record numbers in November to give her and Joe Biden the win. Kamala Harris said it was time to do it again to send Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock to Washington.
It is within your hands, within our grasp.
We need David and Kelly in Washington to protect all that America stands for.
President Trump's daughter Ivanka was in Georgia to drum up support for Republican Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue.
My job right now, and Kelly's job, in addition to that, is make darn sure that we do not give up these 2 seats in Georgia to Chuck Schumer.
President Trump has announced he'll be back in Georgia on the eve of election night. And now, we're getting news that he doesn't like the recent stimulus relief bill tied to an omnibus spending bill. Brian, since you're our guest today, we'll start with you. This is a big deal. The president says it's not enough money for Americans, a one-time payment of $600. And the spending bill also includes millions of dollars for Pakistan, Cambodia, Nepal, Ukraine, and Sudan. Not to mention another $40 million to the Kennedy Center, which already received $25 million earlier this year. How can Congress justify the spending bill when thousands of small business owners, many of them restaurant owners, are fighting to keep their doors open?
Well, a lot of that spending is just regular federal spending. It's outside of the $900 billion stimulus bill. And look, let's not forget, it took a long time for us to get to this point where we can get the stimulus money back out the door into the hands of those restaurant owners, those small business owners, and those families who are facing a end of the moratorium on evictions at the end of the year. So we may have a lot of people losing their households. I think that if you have problems with the spending bill, the time to do it is before they get passed through the House and Senate. That's the problem here. Let's sign this bill into law, get this money out the door, which is what Republicans want, right? Senator Perdue cut an ad praising this bill already. It's very hard to get bipartisan support for an even bigger bill. Let's sign this, keep the government from getting closed next week. We're facing another shutdown, and then go back to the table and negotiate again. There's nothing against them having another bill.
Theron, this is trickling down to the Senate runoffs here in Georgia. Raphael Warnock called the direct payments not only out of touch, but disrespectful, while both Democrats supported the bill because it does provide immediate relief to eligible Americans. They both say it's not enough to cover rent and bills that have been piling up.
Well, very early on, Laura, we heard from Reverend Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff saying that we needed to have more money in the stimulus. And I think they were one of the first to say that $2,000 should be that number. And so it's very refreshing to see that the president agrees with the Democrats of saying that we actually need more money, and particularly sort of somewhat verbally agreeing on the $2,000 number. But ultimately, it's kind of what Brian said. They can always make sure that they get this passed, and which they've done, get back to the table. Don't leave Washington until we actually do what's right for the American people.
Phil, President Trump is agreeing with AOC on this number, this $2,000 number. Who would have ever thought? Senators Loeffler and Perdue released a joint statement accusing their Democratic challengers, though, of playing politics with Americans' health and livelihoods, and they praised the legislation. But now, they appear to be at odds with President Trump, who agrees it's not enough for Americans and too much in international aid, too much money for fish hatcheries and museums. How do you think they navigate this one?
Well, first of all, I'm not that surprised that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the socialist, and President Trump, the America Firster, will agree. Both are trying to fight for the allegiance of the American workers, and that's where the Democratic Party has stabbed them in the back over the last 4 years. And actually, as a socialist, I'm not a socialist, obviously, but she's very smart in appealing to that. President Trump, he wanted originally $1,500 for every American. And I think I'm going to join voices on the right as well as the left saying that $600 is an insult to the American worker, people in everything from the restaurant industry to all these struggling small businesses. The liberal Democrats are still promoting lockdowns, including our 2 Democrat U.S. Senate candidates. It was a 5,500-page bill that hardly anyone read, and thank goodness they're talking as we tape about at least not touching the COVID part of it. I mean, everybody wants that. But the foreign aid is an insult and an outrage. Take that money away. Laura, you named these countries. Even the liberal Democrats had to laugh, wanted a wall built in Jordan between Syria and Jordan. I thought liberals were opposed to walls, especially ours.
Kathy, over to you. Some say this is just more evidence of the swamp with all of this pork when Americans are truly suffering. Do you agree? And what should be done now moving forward?
Well, I do think that this is a real indication of the power that Mitch McConnell has, and I think what the crux of this these Senate runoffs are here in Georgia, right? He held up the conversation for months when we could have been working on just aid very specifically to people that we knew that needed it, and he didn't put it into play until he saw that it was causing an election problem for Loeffler and Perdue. So that's the first problem. If you want to stop this, you've got to get rid of Mitch McConnell's power so that we can get back to having regular debates. But there are really troubling things in here, like corporations that are not only getting loan forgiveness, but can also take a tax credit for the money that they got for free. It's double dipping, and it's really insulting because, again, we've got people just teetering on the brink of disaster. Here we are a couple days before Christmas, and what they get served up is a lump of coal. And I think that also this foreign aid money really ties the hands of the Biden administration as they come in and try to renegotiate and take a look at what our lack of foreign policy is in these places. And he should be able to have the resources he needs to use when that policy comes forward.
Brian, you mentioned that Senator Perdue has an ad out, in support of this stimulus deal. Should he continue to run this ad, even though he's in opposition with folks like even Senator Lindsey Graham came out in support of a $2,000 stimulus payment for folks who are eligible? What impact is this going to have for Senators Loeffler and Perdue?
Well, they're on the tip of the sword of this, of course, and they're the ones who face the most immediate political implications for these decisions. They've been getting hammered, to use Mitch McConnell's words, over the stimulus payments by the Democrats. So I think that they're in a tough spot here. They have supported this legislation, but they've also been unfailingly loyal to President Trump and to his positions. And Kelly Loeffler famously said she agrees with President Trump 100% of the time. So what do you do from here? Well, I really do wish that President Trump would put them in a little bit of a better position. And again, if he had a problem with this bill, we should have said it before the bill went to the floor to be passed. His administration team was involved in these negotiations. And look, some Republicans in Congress are trying to be fiscally responsible. We do need aid, but we don't need the aid package like what the Democrats were proposing earlier this year, $3-4 trillion. We don't have the money for that, and unemployment is not at the level that would justify that.
All right, we'll leave it there, everybody. Great insight. Thank you all. Coming up, Georgians welcome the coronavirus vaccine, but some are questioning how it's getting distributed across the state.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
The first doses of the coronavirus vaccine arrived in Georgia, but many now are wondering why some hospitals are getting it for their frontline workers and others are not. Kathy, there were some questions as to how Cancer Treatment Centers of America received enough vaccines for their entire staff when other hospitals with actual COVID patients went without. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was really concerned when I first heard that because I couldn't quite understand what the issue was. So I just, called Dr. Google and looked around and discovered that former Representative Tom Price is on their board. Now, whether or not that had anything to do with why they got a full load of vaccines and Phoebe Putney Hospital, that has been on the front line for the entire country, received none, it sure is bad optics. And I think that we should have had our Department of Public Health looking a little closer at what that distribution was. And I certainly hope we don't get into one of those situations where, red states get vaccines and blue states don't. And if you've got the right donor on your board, you get first in line. It can't be that way.
Brian, I want to go to you because you spent time, obviously, in Governor Deal's administration. It appears that many of these decisions are being made at the federal level, but can't the state step in and prioritize healthcare facilities and nursing homes where the hotspots are right now?
I would hope so. And what I really do hope, Lori, is that this is just an early going hiccup in this process. This is a massive undertaking, a mobilization almost like World War II to get these vaccines out to all of the people who need them. And obviously there have been some disparities. There have been some stories out there about some getting all that they need and some getting none, or some not getting nearly enough. This is going to be an administrative headache for the next few weeks. But the Department of Public Health here says the problem is at the federal level, which makes sense because this is such a gargantuan operation. Let's have patience. Let's give them a couple of weeks, get into the new year. And if we still have problems then, let's start cracking heads.
All right, we'll give it some time. Thanks. Well, I want to go back to some of the election news because we can't escape it, right? A Texas group is now questioning the validity of hundreds of thousands of voters after their names showed up on Postal Service lists revealing their addresses had changed. Phil, now Fair Fight says it will challenge this lawsuit in federal court. What's your take?
Well, Fair Fight is really fighting to keep everybody on the rolls, whether they're eligible or not eligible. And this group, there's nothing wrong under the Georgia Code. Anybody can come in and try to get rid of dead people and challenge people who are out of state. And let's face it, I think people realize now that it's a mess in terms of our voter rolls. And that's why, even as we tape, they were having another hearing and listening to fraud affidavits and allegations and how to fix it. And so I'm glad that these people are trying to ferret out fraud and clean up the voting rolls. So this Texas group, along with the lawsuit that I've talked about, that Ray Smith is the lead attorney, talking about double voting and people under 18 voting, these are all sworn affidavits. For example, Kathy and I were debating the last show, there's no voter fraud. Well, yes, there is, unless all these people are lying on 100 or so affidavits.
So, Theron, over to you. If the names of these voters showed up on some postal list, as this group claims, can we not just verify these voters and move on?
That's exactly what we need to do. And I want to give some time to Kathy because Fair Fight was mentioned, so I'm sure she wants to jump in here. But Lori, this is, again, we just want the evidence. And if you have the evidence, produce it, let it be an investigation that occurs, and then verify the names. And if they're verifiable, then it's okay. If they're not, then let's point that out. But I'll give Kathy a few seconds to respond because I know Fair Fight was mentioned.
Yeah, Kathy, you do some consulting work for Fair Fight. What is your take on all of this? Because it's my understanding the lawsuit that Fair Fight is filing says, you know what, you can have these outside groups come in and talk about Georgia voting rolls.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just bad form to begin with, right? When we got into this runoff situation and folks were contacting us and everybody wanted to come down here and help, the response all along has been, let Georgia do Georgia, right? Let us handle our own election processes. And I think that's sort of a bipartisan concern at this particular point. We also have a Georgia law that says you can't flush people from the voter registration 90 days out from an election, and we are right in that heat period. Obviously, we want to make sure that people are qualified to vote, but we just went through the November election, 3 recounts and multiple signature audits. So we know our voter rolls are pretty tight. If people have real evidence, that's fine. But what we're seeing is, people feeling harassed, people having to vote provisionally, folks who are in the military overseas who now have their ballots challenged may not have the time to cure their ballot with these multiple lawsuits. And all I would say to everybody right now is buckle up, because the vote count for the runoff is going to be pretty crazy, and it's going to make the general election look like a walk in the park.
Phil, do you agree with Kathy? I mean, this could be a long January if these races are so tight. I think we're all kind of hoping either one way or the other, it's not a close election result.
Well, I do think it's going to be a very tight race. In fact, we'll have an Insider Advantage Fox 5 poll maybe out Wednesday or Thursday. We're taping on a Wednesday, of course, to see if it's tightening or what is happening. But I do think that this lawsuit has some legs that Attorney Ray Smith is doing. It's filed in Fulton County Superior Court with all of these affidavits. And regardless of what happens with the presidential aspect of this, our voter rolls have to be cleaned up. And of course, number one priority in the 21 General Assembly will be election reform. I mean, that's what everybody's talking about. And we've got to overturn this terrible settlement that Raffensperger did with the Democrats last March, which weakened the signature verifications. That's the weak spot.
Well, Phil, I'm glad you mentioned that we are recording on the Wednesday before Christmas so we get some time with our families, because in this election cycle, the news is changing hour by hour, minute by minute. So thanks for mentioning that. Well, coming up, Atlanta City Councilman Howard Shook goes on the attack against city leadership over the rise in crime after a 7-year-old girl is shot in the head in Buckhead. We'll discuss straight ahead.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Atlanta police say a 7-year-old girl was shot in the head while riding in the back of a car with her mom and aunt outside of Phipps Plaza after a fight broke out among several men in the parking lot. It's just the latest in a string of violence that has rocked the city of Atlanta, and it's not just in Buckhead. Atlanta City Councilman Howard Shook went directly after city leaders, tweeting out to the administration, quote, "I don't want to hear the word uptick. Stop minimizing our concerns by telling us that crime is up everywhere. Spare us from the lie that the steady outflow of our officers isn't as bad as it is." He goes on to say it will take a lot to turn this around, but here are 3 things we need. Number 1, leadership. Number 2, some leadership. And number 3, any leadership. Phil, I think Howard Shook has said what a lot of us are thinking, enough is enough.
151 murders in the city of Atlanta this year. It's a record over the past 20 years. It's an absolute disgrace. It's an outrage. Councilman Shook is right. I think a majority of the council, no matter their politics, is sick and tired of the lack of leadership. It's laid right at the feet of Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and this incompetent police chief, Rodney Bryant. In fact, I think there ought to be a vote of no confidence in the police chief. Where was the mayor, for example, on Tuesday of this week? Why didn't she show up for the news conference that Chief Bryant did? And there was no condolences. I know the girl hadn't died yet as we taped, but it doesn't look good as we tape. But where's the empathy, and where is the talk of let's have a one-shot bonus for our police that are under the gun here, and they're still hemorrhaging in terms of retirements and people quitting. We need that, and Councilman Shook and I would hope a majority of council will at least try to do that in January. And why is the mayoral administration fighting that?
Well, our prayers are definitely going out to this little girl and her family, especially around this holidays. Kathy, you ran for mayor, you were Atlanta City Council president. What would you do if you were in a leadership position with the city? Because clearly what the mayor and the police chief are doing, well, it's just not enough.
Well, it's not enough. And unfortunately, I try to be fair about this when I offer criticism to this mayor, but she's got to stop doing task forces. Now is the time for leadership and action. The first thing that has to happen is that she has got to confirm a police chief. I get it that the timing isn't right, but you can't wait for months and months and months and have an interim. That undermines people's confidence. I think, secondly, you need to really look at what the numbers are, be very, very transparent on, what our staffing levels are, and make sure that we've got people staffed up and ready to go. I think we also need to kind of make sure that we've got people working shifts for us and not not as heavily on the private sector so that we're at full capacity all the time. There's lots of things our police department needs, including a new training facility and some other equipment. So I think that's another thing that happens. And we have to have an agenda that gets illegal guns off the streets. This is one of the most liberal states in the country for anybody having access to a gun. And one of the problems and the byproducts that we're having of those policies are that people who don't need to have guns have them. And there's lots of things that we can do to keep guns in the hands of people who are legal and get them out of the hands of people who aren't.
Theron, I'm going to get to you, but Brian, I want to ask you first. You don't live all that far from Phipps Plaza. What is your take on all of this?
Well, Lori, as you know, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and she goes along that corridor to school every single day. She went and sat on Santa's lap, or socially distanced with Santa at Phipps earlier this month. So this is very personal to me, and I do not understand why we're not seeing more vocal leadership from the city on this. Everyone knows we have a huge problem. This comes from this summer, where there was the shooting at Wendy's, and many police officers saw a police officer doing something that made sense in that moment and had his life destroyed, his career destroyed. And so that sent a strong message to police. Why would I go into a violent situation? If things go awry, I'm going to get blamed for it. I'm going to be destroyed. And so, of course, police are staying away. We've got to change that atmosphere and let police do their jobs. They got to do it responsibly. We do need reforms. Nobody's saying there are no problems. But police are scared to do the job.
Theron, Mayor Bottoms responded to Howard Shook, saying she's open to suggestions on what to do.
Yeah, Lori, she said a little bit more than that. So let me just, as always, present the facts on this show. So to respond to Phil, the mayor did come out and basically express her concerns and prayers for the 7-year-old girl, and she's staying updated sort of by the minute on her condition. Secondly, while the mayor is the leader of the city, and she acknowledges that, her sort of statement was also talking about, hey, you know, gun violence is a big issue in the city of Atlanta. I mean, Kathy just mentioned that. And I think we got to be fair here. Don't get me wrong. She's the leader of the city. She's accepted responsibility on what she can control. The chief of police can control certain things. But Lori, we got to be fair. We cannot know when two men are going to get into a shooting near Lenox Mall, and unfortunately a 7-year-old girl was shot with a stray bullet. So first of all, I think I'm sad, I'm angry about what's going on here, but when are we going to start listening to what the mayor said? And so I listened to her. Now, don't get me wrong, the mayor has said publicly that I'm probably one of her biggest fans, but I'm also one of her biggest critics. And so we've talked about this. I've also talked to Chief Bryant. I'm going to call Councilman Shook. He's my councilman, and talk to him. And so I think a lot of us, while we understand that this is the #1 issue in our city, we as a community have got to make sure that we step up and start just supporting this administration, supporting this council, supporting our officers to make sure that we call it out. And that is, no, let me finish, no wrap here. The thing is that there's a community approach to this. And again, while this was an unfortunate occurrence, you know, we have violence in the city, but you cannot blame all of this just on the mayor. She does deserve to receive the fair share of it. But when are we going to say that these two men that got into this altercation, Lord, no, let me finish.
I don't have time to finish, Theron.
Why don't we point?
We got to go. We got to wrap it right there, or else we'll have no time for winners and losers, but you could finish there. And we are going to discuss this time and time again because the issue is clearly not going away. So thanks, everybody. Coming up, we will have winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Theron, I apologize for having to cut you off. We will revisit that issue, I promise. Lots to discuss there. And I will start with you for winners and losers.
Yeah, let me finish my statement. So what I was saying was this, is that while crime is an issue in the city, and the mayor is the leader of the city, and she definitely is going to make sure that she does everything that she can, I'm just calling on the community to make sure that we continue to do our part and that we work with these city leaders, the Atlanta police officers, to really deal with this issue around crime, but particularly around gun violence. If people know who were the men that were involved in this altercation that resulted into a 7-year-old getting hit by a stray bullet, you should say something and help the APD with this investigation.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you were able to get that in. Thank you, and thanks for your patience. Phil, over to you.
Well, the loser is Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. I mean, a lot of this is criminal gang activity. And what does she do? She abolishes the anti-gang unit in the Atlanta Police Department. And Brian was just right a little while ago. She needs to say right now that there'll be due process for all police officers in the Atlanta Police Department if they're involved in a shooting incident, and not just be permissive.
All right, Brian, over to you.
My winner is Greg McGarity. They're retiring athletic. Can I start over?
Yeah, sure. You're good. You're good. Keep going.
Sorry. My winner is the outgoing retiring athletic director of UGA, Greg McGarity, who has served us for more than 10 years. And my loser is the people of Georgia who've had to endure a 9-week runoff. Let's fix this law, shorten the runoff.
All right, Kathy, we got about 40 seconds. Your turn.
Project South and State Representative David Dreyer are my winners for filing a federal class action lawsuit against the ICE facility in Ocilla, Georgia. My losers are Donald Trump Jr. and our 2 Senate candidates for appearing at a rally there 4 days ago with no particular sign that I've been able to research condemning the unwanted gynecological procedures that were done on women that were held in that facility.
All right, we'll leave it there, gang. Thank you so much. We hope you all have a very happy new year, and thank you so much for joining us. Make it a great week. We'll see you next time.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.